Hello, my name is Taff Watts. This is my presentation for my research paper, which is Sexual Assault Counseling for Adults. This is for my Introduction to Counseling class. Over the next few minutes, I will go over the details of some of the things, the high points of what I wrote in my research paper, and explain some of those things. The first thing we need to do before we can get into that, and one of the things I did in the introduction of my research paper, is define sexual assault. Sexual assault is the committing of the following acts. A sexual act upon another person by any of the following: threatening or placing a person in fear. In other words, making them fearful that you're going to do something to them. Causing bodily harm to another person, physically making them do it. Making a fraudulent representation that a sexual act serves a professional purpose. In other words, if you have sex, you're going to gain these things by having sex with me. Introducing a belief that a pretense or concealment the person is another person. In other words, you're acting as somebody else. They believe you're somebody else. A sexual act upon another person where a person knows or reasonably should know the other person is asleep, unconscious, otherwise unaware of the sexual act is occurring. That's pretty much self-explanatory. A sexual act upon another person where the other person is incapable of consenting to the sexual act due to impairment, intoxication, or any other substance that has been applied to them. Or if there's a mental incapacitation that they're unable to consent, or ages also factor into on this. The three things we're going to look at when we're talking about sexual assault is we're going to look at, when it comes to counseling, is obstacles, signs, and treatments. The obstacles are important because if we're not aware of the obstacles we face, it's going to be hard to get to the root of what the problem is and give the person the counseling they need. The other thing is signs, because a person may not tell us that they were sexually assaulted, so we got to be aware that that may be an underlying condition that's causing the person the problems they're going through. Say if it was depression or something like that. And then we're going to look at treatment just briefly. In obstacles, I've got three things wrote here: underreported, FBI study, and self-blame. And I say FBI study because a lot of the research I did was based out of there, because there's thousands and thousands of cases of sexual assault reported each year. But the thing we've got to remember about that it's one of the most underreported crimes there is. So if there's thousands upon thousands reported, that means there's thousands upon thousands that are not reported. So if you look at that, and when it comes to counseling, you may be counseling somebody that's never reported it, they've never talked to anybody about it, and it may be causing them trouble, and they may be ashamed as the reason they're not telling you, which we're going to get to that about self-blame. So we have to be able to realize that, and realize that it's one of those things. When it comes to self-blame, sexual assault is a tough deal because the victims a lot of times blame themselves. They say, well, maybe I shouldn't have been in that place or that position. Why was I there? Did I lead the person on? Did I do things like that? You have to be aware of that. Also, you have the deal, well, I was dressed a certain way, or I shouldn't have been drinking, or different things like that. And if a person blames themselves, they're less likely to reach out for help or be willing to admit to certain things like that. So that's some of the obstacles we have to look at and we have to overcome when it becomes counseling. The next thing we move on to from there is the signs of it. First one being trust. You know, somebody that's sexually assaulted usually is assaulted by somebody they know. There are stranger assaults, but it's rare. Most of the time it's somebody they know and somebody they trust. So there you have somebody they trusted already taking advantage of them, maybe physically harming them, definitely mentally harming them, because this thing hangs on for years. So you have to be careful. So for you to be able to be an effective counselor, you have to build trust. Well, this person already is having issues with trust. And if they hadn't reported this to law enforcement, because we'll be honest, law enforcement, it's one of the hardest crimes to prove, sexual assault or any other crime, it doesn't matter what it is. If we have an eyewitness, and I'm speaking from law enforcement background, if we have an eyewitness and they say that person committed a crime, it's easy to convict. except when it comes to sexual assault. Sexual assaults are scrutinized so much that a lot of times the victim's not believed. Well, if they're already been violated by somebody they trust, and then maybe they did report it, and law enforcement didn't believe them, or the judges, maybe law enforcement believed them, they arrested the person, and then when it came to the court systems, they turned them loose because there wasn't enough evidence. You could see where they would have a lack of trust. The next one is seclusion. They're the type of people that pull away from people. And a lot of times people that reach out for help are ones that are encouraged by friends or family or those around them, encouraged for help. Well, if you're secluding yourself, if you're pulling away from everybody, then you're less likely to reach out for help and to do things. So we have to be aware of those things, especially if it starts happening during treatment. Maybe it's something that they've covered up that we're uncovering, and so they start pulling away from us during our treatment. So it's different things like that you have to be aware of. The last thing I have on here is perpetrator. Now this, you're probably thinking, why perpetrator? Well, in sexual assaults, a lot of times we find out that the victims become perpetrators. In other words, they do it to somebody else. It builds a cycle. And so we have to know the signs of a perpetrator, because they may have been a victim at one time in their life, or victims may become perpetrators if we don't address the different things through counseling. So that's different things we have to look at. We're looking at healing a person mentally, and so we have to be aware of those things and be careful of those things. And it's a tough situation. It's hard to break the cycle because ultimately it's a cycle. Then once we maybe identified the problems, seen the signs, we're addressing them, maybe they came to us because of that, then we can move on to the treatment. First and foremost, you have to teach, or you have to make the person understand that recovery is possible. You can recover from this. You can get by. There's all kinds of success stories. People that recovered from these things went on to do great things and all that. We can't take, there's no magic eraser that can go into your mind and erase things. I've wished in law enforcement and as a pastor, I wish I've been able to go and just take things from people, lift it and take it away from them. And we're going to talk about the spiritual side in a minute. But we've got to remember that. We've got to address them. We've got to know that they can get past this. They can grow from this. They can actually use it to their advantage as far as maybe reaching out and helping others and showing them it is possible to go through. A lot of the counselors, a lot of the advocates when it comes to sexual assault actually were victims themselves. And that's why they're so good at what they do as far as being advocates and things like that. They know the things that the person's going through. We have to address the physical and the mental part of it. And I know I kind of talked about the mental part of it earlier. The physical part is easy. If it's new or something that's happened recently, broke bones, cuts, scratches, and all that, we're real good about addressing those. We're real good about cleaning them up, bandaging them up, taking medicine, healing the physical side of it. But that's just one little part of it. Well, you can't just stay with the physical. You've got to move on to the mental, which is the treatment we're talking about, and finding the person that's right for you and the person that can actually address your problems, and getting the person to open up is key in the mental part of it. Getting them willing to talk about their feelings and to understand that they've been put into an extreme situation, but the feelings and the reactions they're having are normal for somebody that's been put in an extreme situation. And ultimately the spiritual. We've got to be able to go to the Word. We've got to be able to go to the Bible and talk to these people and show them that God can get you ultimately through it. That's where we find our recovery. That's where we find our healing is in God. He can help take those things, because something like this can be so detrimental. It can beat you down. It can keep you unable to function in everyday life. But if you're willing to go to the Lord and you're willing to give those things over to God, then He will show you that anything's possible, and you can recover. You can use it in spiritual. It talks about things like this. You know, people sometimes say the Bible doesn't cover it. The Bible covers everything. And it's just as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago when it was started. They started writing it. That's what we have to focus on, and that's what we have to look at. If we will address these things in treatment, And then ultimately, you have to find somebody. You may be the person that can treat them. You may have to refer them to somebody else or move on and find treatment. And then you address the person, and once you get their trust and once you get the ability to see where this is going, then you can look at the different options and different types of specific treatment for them and what they know and what they respond to. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon or a good morning.